Solve 15x squared plus 2x equals 45. This is a quadratic equation. And to solve quadratic equations, we're going to use the method of factoring. And so the first step is always to combine any terms that can be combined, and then move all of your terms to one side so that you have a zero on one side of the equation. So in other words, this 45 needs to be moved over here so that we have it set equal to 0. The quadratic equation and the method of solving by factoring needs the quadratic to be set equal to 0. After that is done, the next step is to factor it using whatever tools are necessary to factor it. Now this is a quadratic equation. We first look and see if there are any common factors, and there are no common factors to pull out. Then we look at this and we say, okay, it's a trinomial quadratic, and based on our experience, we're going to use the unfoil method, which is to say that this thing should factor into the product of two binomials. And so we have missing terms that we need to find in each of those four spots. And so we just go through the checklist. The first thing we ask ourselves is, we know that the first times the first has to equal the first. So we need to find those two possible things that can multiply to give us 15x squared. And there are actually a couple choices there, so let's write them down. The possible firsts are a 1x and a 15x. The other choice we might have is a 3x and a 5x. Both of those pairs multiply to give us 15x squared. So then, since we don't know for sure which pair it is, we need to identify also what the possible lasts are. And remember the rule. The last term times the last term needs to equal the last term. So we need to find numbers, a pair of numbers that multiply to give us negative 45. And here we have several choices. Again, we've got to get a negative 45, so we could have a plus 1 and a minus 45, or a minus 1 and a plus 45. Right? Notice how we changed the signs there. In either position we get a negative 45. But then we can get a plus 3 and a minus 15. That could work. Or a minus 3 and a plus 15. And then let's use the 5 and a minus 9 and a minus 5 and a plus 9. And those are the combinations that might appear in the last positions. So basically we at this point need to mix and match. We need to figure out which one of those works with which one of these. And we could try a couple. Maybe let's just put it over here. Let's just guess and test a combination. So maybe we just say, oh well, could it be an x and a 15x along with a plus 1 and a minus 45, just trying that. Now there are a couple reasons that this wouldn't be the case, but if we can just try it and see if it works, just choosing this and this combination. And how do we test it? Well, you FOIL it out. So first times first is of course 15x squared. That's how we planned it. The outer is a minus 45x, and the inner is a plus 15x. So they will combine to give us a minus 30x. We can actually stop there because we don't want a minus 30x. We want a plus 2x. But just notice that the last times the last is minus 45. So in reality, the first and the last should always match up, and it's just that middle term that comes from the outer and the inner. So that particular combination doesn't work. Now, be aware that it could be the case that we would swap the 1 and the 45. That's another different combination. Or we could swap just the signs. So just with this pair we have a lot of choices. So we can try that, and we can hopefully find something fairly quickly, but in general I always try to pick numbers that are kind of the close ones. So in other words, for my first one, I hardly ever would go x and 15x, because 1 and 15 are far apart. I will very often start with a 3x and a 5x because they're just closer, and especially if this middle number is, small. Then we need to pick some possible lasts, and we could kind of use the same argument, use a pair that is close together. So the 5 and the 9 work pretty close together. So let's try, I'm going to put this down here, let's try a 3x, a 5x, and let's try, say, a minus 9 and a plus 5. Right? Again, there are some reasons why we if we're really paying attention, we would know this doesn't work to begin with. But if not, that's okay, because we can just FOIL it out. First times first. There's the first. There's the outer. There's the inner. And there's the last. And notice, that's going to give us a minus 35. Minus 30. So that's not going to work. Would it work if we just swapped the signs and made it a plus 9 and a minus 5? Well, swapping signs, let's just double check. It's going to have a predictable result. 15x squared when we FOIL this out. Outer is a minus 15x. Inner is a plus 45x. And last is a minus 45. So what do we get? We get a plus 30x. So if you just swap the signs, you're just going to get the opposite number. So a 30x or minus 30x in the first case, a 30x in the second case, neither of which work. Well, what if we change the positions? And what if we try a minus 5 and a plus 9? Well, what's going to happen there? The first is still going to be 15x squared, and the last is still going to be minus 45. That works. Outer, let's just write it in here, is a minus 27x, or plus 27x, and inner is a minus 25x. Look at that, that's going to turn into a plus 2x. So that turns out to be the correct way to factor this. 3x minus 5 and a 5x plus 9. So we've factored it. Now, once you've factored it, the next thing you do is you set each factor equal to 0 and solve each one of those little equations. So this one here is going to lead to x equals 5/3. This one's going to lead to x equals negative 9/5. And now you have your two solutions. And you could check those by plugging them back in.